My name is Xanth. I am 28 years old. I run my own freelance design business, and 3 months ago, my mother did not book a hotel room for me on a family trip that she personally invited me to attend. I found out at the front desk in front of a lobby full of strangers when the clerk looked at the reservation list and told me my name was not there. That was the moment I learned exactly where I stood in this family. And what happened next changed everything. Before I get into it, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now. If this story sounds like something you or someone you know has lived through, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Because I promise you, the part at the Thanksgiving dinner table is something I still cannot fully believe happened. Stay with me. To understand what happened in that lobby, you need to understand the 2 years that came before it. I left my corporate marketing job when I was 26. I had been doing graphic and brand design on the side for about a year, building a small client base, and I reached a point where staying in a job I was miserable in made less sense than taking the risk. So I left. I gave 2 weeks' notice, saved 3 months of expenses, and started working for myself. It was not a smooth start. The first 6 months were inconsistent, some months were fine, others were tight. I was transparent about that with my family because I thought honesty was the right approach. That was my first mistake, at least as far as my family was concerned. My sister Dara is 34. She married her husband Owen 6 years ago. He has a stable job in commercial real estate. They own a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. Their kids are in good schools, and on the surface everything looks exactly the way my mother believes adult life should look. Dara has never been unkind to me in an obvious way. She does it carefully. She does it with a smile and a slight tilt of her head, as if she is just asking innocent questions. At the last Christmas gathering before this trip, she asked me in front of 4 relatives whether I had considered going back to a real job before I used up all my savings. She said it the way someone says they are just being practical. Everyone at the table nodded slowly. My mother, Patricia, is not a cruel woman, I want to be clear about that, but she raised us with a very specific measurement of what success looks like, and I do not currently have any of the items on that list. No husband, no house, no title, no salary she can quote to her friends. For the past 2 years, every phone call with her has included at least one version of the same conversation. She asks how things are going. I tell her honestly. There is a pause. Then she says something like, "I just worry about you," which translates to, "I think you made a mistake and I want you to admit it." Uncle Garrett is my mother's older brother. He is 61, never married, built his own commercial property business over 30 years, and is the most financially successful person in our family by a significant margin. He is not flashy about it. He does not talk about money the way some people do. But everyone in the family knows that Garrett's support has quietly filled gaps over the years. I did not know the full extent of it until that Thanksgiving dinner, but I knew enough to understand that when Garrett spoke, people in our family listened. 3 weeks before the trip, my mother called me. She said the family was doing a Thanksgiving trip to a resort about 4 hours from home. She said it would be nice to have everyone together. She said it would mean a lot to her if I came. I had 2 client deadlines that week and I told her that. She pushed a little. She said family time was important and that I could work anywhere. I rearranged my schedule, pushed one deadline by 3 days with a client who was flexible, and confirmed I was coming. In the family group chat, the trip details came through over the following 2 weeks. Room assignments were discussed in a separate thread, and I noticed early on that I was not tagged in it. I sent my mother a direct message asking about my room. She replied the same evening and said she would handle it and not to worry. I did not push further. I trusted her. The morning of the drive, Dara and Owen packed their family into their vehicle and left early. My mother went with them. I drove separately for the first portion, then Garrett caught up to me at a rest stop and we drove the last 2 hours together. He asked about my work about 40 minutes into the drive. I told him the truth that the previous 2 months had been slower than I wanted, but that I had just signed 2 new clients and the pipeline was looking better. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "That takes real guts, what you are doing." I thanked him and changed the subject because I was not used to hearing that from anyone in my family and I did not know what to do with it. When we pulled into the resort parking lot, Dara and Owen were already inside. My mother was already inside. I grabbed my bag and followed Garrett through the main entrance. The check-in line was short. Dara and Owen went first. Their keys came out in under a minute. My mother went next. Same. I stepped up to the counter with my identification and the clerk typed my name into the system and then stopped. She looked at the screen. She typed again. She looked up at me and said very professionally that she was not seeing a reservation under my name and asked if it might be under a different name or a different date. I turned to my mother, who was standing 5 feet away with her key card already in her hand. I asked her directly what name the room was under. She looked at the floor first. Then she looked at me and said the booking had gotten complicated and she had not sorted out my room yet. I asked what that meant. She said she had only reserved rooms for herself, Dara, Owen, and the kids. There was a moment where I simply stood there and processed that. I had driven 4 hours. I had rearranged a client deadline. She had personally called me and asked me to be here, and there was no room. Before I could say anything, Dara stepped forward. Owen was standing behind her. Garrett was about 15 feet away near the elevator, waiting. Dara looked at me and said, loud enough for the clerk and several other guests in the lobby to hear, that this trip was meant for people who had built something real, not for someone still trying to figure out basic adult life. She said that a failure did not deserve to travel with this family. She used that word, failure. And then she said it a second time slower, as if I had not heard her the first time. The lobby went quiet. I felt everything in my chest tighten at once. I looked at my mother, who was looking at the floor again. I looked at Dara, who had her arms crossed and her chin up. Owen was staring at the tile. Garrett, from across the lobby, had gone completely still. I picked up my bag from the floor where I had set it. I looked at Dara and said clearly and quietly, "Then I will leave," and I walked toward the exit. No raised voice, no tears, no theatrical moment, I just walked. The lobby was silent behind me. The air outside was cold. I stood on the pavement outside the resort entrance and opened the rideshare app on my phone. I was already calculating the logistics. The nearest airport was about 50 miles out. If I caught a late afternoon flight, I could be home before midnight. I would send the client an email in the morning, get back on schedule, and act as if the last 4 hours had not happened. I had the app open and was entering the airport address when I heard my name. Garrett came through the entrance doors. He was not running, he was walking fast and with focus. He called my name once more when he saw I had stopped. I turned around. His face was not pitying. That is the part I want to be specific about because pity was the last thing I could have handled in that moment. He looked angry, controlled but angry, and it was not directed at me. He stopped a few feet away and said he had heard everything. He said he had been standing near that elevator for the entire exchange and had not moved fast enough and that he was sorry for that. I told him it was not his responsibility. He said that was not the point. He asked me one question. He said, "Do you want to go home or do you want to stay and not let this be the thing that runs you off?" I told him I was not interested in being somewhere I was not wanted. He said he understood that, but asked me to separate 2 things, what Dara wanted and what the facts of the situation were. He said the fact was that I had driven 4 hours to be here, I had moved work deadlines to show up, and leaving immediately meant that Dara's words in that lobby were the last word on the subject. Then I told him I was not going to take charity from anyone. He said this was not charity. He said if I left, he was not staying either, and a Thanksgiving family trip without 2 of the family members was just a hotel stay. He walked back into the lobby, went to the front desk, and booked a second room under his name without any further discussion with me about it. He handed me the key card in the lobby and said dinner was at 7 p.m. The clerk processed the booking with the careful expression of someone who had witnessed too much of this afternoon already. Garrett and I rode the elevator up separately. Before he got off at his floor, he stopped the door with his hand and said one thing. He said he had been watching the way things worked in this family for a long time and had kept quiet because he told himself it was not his place. He said he was done with that position. He said dinner tonight was going to be different. I did not ask what he meant. He let the door close. My room was on a different floor from the rest of the family. I set my bag down, sat on the edge of the bed and called my best friend Renee back home. I told her the whole thing in about 10 minutes. She said to get through dinner, come home tomorrow, and never let our mother guilt me into a family trip again. I almost agreed with her. I sat on that call for another 20 minutes after she hung up, just sitting in the quiet. Then I thought about the lobby. I thought about my mother looking at the floor. I thought about Dara saying that word twice deliberately in front of strangers. I thought about the fact that I had rearranged real work, real commitments, real professional relationships to be here, and the person who invited me had not thought I was worth a room reservation. I got up, I washed my face, I got dressed for dinner. I was not going to eat in my room and let this become a story where I disappeared quietly. I took the elevator down to the restaurant at 6:58 p.m. The restaurant had a large private dining area reserved for the family. There were 12 people at the table when I arrived. My mother, Dara, Owen, their 2 kids, Uncle Garrett, 2 of my aunts, my mother's younger sister Bev and Garrett's other sister Connie, and 3 cousins, including my cousin Lily, who is 25, and her brother Marcus, who is 27. When I walked in, Dara raised her eyebrows. My mother looked up with an expression I could not fully read. Nobody said anything about the lobby. Nobody apologized. I sat down in the empty chair between Lily and Marcus, and Lily moved her water glass to make room for mine. The first 20 minutes were ordinary in the way that tense family gatherings try to be ordinary. Owen talked about a commercial lease deal he had closed recently. Dara talked about the renovation they were doing on their back patio. My mother asked about the resort gym. Aunt Bev talked about her daughter's school play. It was the performance of a normal family dinner, and everyone was participating in it. Aunt Connie turned to me at some point and asked how my work was going. It was a genuine question. She smiled when she asked it. Before I could answer, Dara said, with the same careful smile she always uses, "Zand is still working on making the freelance thing stick." She said it to Connie, not to me, as if I was being discussed rather than present. I answered Connie's question directly. I told her I had signed a branding contract with a regional hospitality company the previous month, and that a second client, a startup in the tech sector, had just brought me on for a 6-month project. I said it plainly without emphasis because the facts were enough. Connie said that sounded like solid work. Dara picked up her fork and turned to say something to Owen. My mother changed the subject to the resort's breakfast menu. Garrett had not said much through any of this. He had been eating steadily and listening. About halfway through the main course, he set his fork down on the edge of his plate, picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth and stood up. Everyone assumed a toast. Aunt Bev reached for her wine glass. Owen straightened slightly. My mother looked up with a prepared smile. Garrett did not raise his glass. He said he had something he needed to say, and he wanted everyone at the table to hear it without interruption. His voice was even. He was not performing anger. He was just stating things. He described what had happened in the lobby that afternoon. He went through it specifically. No room reserved for Zand, the word failure used publicly and repeated, and the fact that not one person at that check-in counter, including Zand's own mother, said a single word in her defense. He did not editorialize. He just described what he had witnessed. Then he said he had been financially supporting portions of this family for several years. He said it without drama. He listed it plainly. He had covered the gap in his sister Patricia's mortgage payments on 2 separate occasions when she had come to him privately. He had provided funding for Owen's business venture 3 years prior when it was in trouble, and Owen had needed a financial bridge to keep it solvent. He had paid for the previous year's family vacation when the collective family finances had not supported the trip that everyone wanted to take. He said he had made those contributions because he believed in family and because he had the means to help and chose to use them that way. Then he said that what he had witnessed in the lobby that afternoon made him reconsider what this family actually valued and whether the version of family he had been investing in was real. He said, without raising his voice, that effective immediately he would not be continuing financial support to anyone who had stood in that lobby, and remained silent while Zand was publicly humiliated. Then he sat down, picked up his fork and continued eating. The table did not move for several seconds. Owen's face had gone a particular shade of pale that told me the business funding situation was more current than Garrett had made it sound. My mother opened her mouth and then closed it. Dara said Garrett was being dramatic and that he was blowing one comment out of proportion. Garrett said, without looking up from his plate, that his decision was made and he was not interested in relitigating it at the dinner table. Aunt Bev stared at her wine glass. Connie looked at her hands. Lily shifted in her chair, and I felt her knee press briefly against mine under the table, just for a second before she pulled back. I did not speak during any of Garrett's statement. I did not look at Dara or my mother. I sat straight in my chair with my hands in my lap, and I let the words land where they needed to land. The rest of dinner was nearly silent. The server came twice to refill water glasses, and both times the table conversation was limited to thank yous and requests for bread. The kids at the end of the table ate without knowing what had shifted. Dara did not look at me for the rest of the meal. The remaining 2 days of the trip moved slowly. Dara and Owen stayed close to their room. When they appeared for meals, Owen kept his eyes on his food, and Dara spoke mainly to her kids and to my mother. My mother made 2 attempts to speak with Garrett privately. I know this because Lily told me later that she had seen them in the hallway twice. Garrett was polite in both conversations and changed nothing. On the second afternoon, I was at the resort pool reading through some client notes on my laptop when Lily and Marcus came and sat down near me. They had not planned it as a formal conversation. They just showed up with their coffee and stayed. Marcus said at one point that he had noticed for years the way the family talked about my career situation, and he had always thought it was off. He said he did not have the right words for it at the time, but that watching what happened at dinner made something clearer for him. Lily agreed. Neither of them was telling me what I wanted to hear in the way that feels hollow. They were just being honest, and at that point in the weekend, honest was the only thing that felt like anything real. I was not triumphant about any of it. I want to be clear about that. I was tired. I was relieved in a specific and quiet way, but I was not celebrating. I drove home on the third morning. I had 1 client email waiting and 2 new inquiries in my inbox. I sat at my desk and worked until 9 p.m. and then slept for 9 hours. Approximately 5 weeks after the trip, Garrett had a direct conversation with my mother. He told her that the monthly support he had been providing toward the shortfall in her mortgage payment was ending. He told her he was giving her 60 days to adjust her budget before the support stopped. He was not cutting her off without notice. He was not doing it to punish her. He was doing it because he had told her what his decision was, and he kept his word. My mother called me 3 times that week. The first 2 calls were practical. She was doing calculations, trying to figure out her options, and I think she called me partly because she did not know who else to call and partly because she was hoping I would offer something. I did not offer anything financial. I listened. The third call was different. She called on a Thursday evening and she did not start with logistics. She asked how I was doing, and she waited for the answer. She did not interrupt. She did not redirect to herself. It was the first conversation of that kind we had had in roughly 2 years. It was uncomfortable and halting, and there were silences that neither of us knew how to fill. But she stayed on the phone for 40 minutes and she asked 3 follow-up questions about my client work that were genuine. I did not forget what had happened in the lobby, but I did not hang up on her either. Dara's financial situation shifted in the months that followed. The business Owen had been running, the one Garrett had helped stabilize 3 years prior, lost a key outside investor about 4 months after the Thanksgiving dinner. Without the informal backing network that Garrett had quietly provided through introductions and referrals, the recovery from that loss stalled. Dara and Owen sold one of their 2 vehicles in February. The back patio renovation that had been discussed at the dinner table was paused indefinitely. Dara returned to working full-time in the spring. None of that was something I caused or accelerated. I had no contact with any of those investors or any of those financial decisions. It was simply what happened when a support structure that people had stopped noticing was removed. I heard about the car through Marcus, who mentioned it in passing during a phone call about something else entirely. I did not respond to that part of the conversation with anything more than a quiet acknowledgement. My own work continued on a straight line upward, not dramatic, not sudden. I raised my base rate in January. I booked out my capacity for March and April by mid-February. I stopped checking the family group chat every morning with the particular kind of dread I had carried for 2 years. I muted it. I still read it occasionally, but I stopped letting it set the tone for my day. 7 months after the trip, I received a text message from Dara. It was not long. It said that she had been thinking about what happened at the hotel. It said she had said things she should not have said. It asked if there was a time we could talk. I read it once. I set my phone down and did not respond that day. I read it again the next morning. I thought about it on and off for 3 days without making a decision. On the 3rd evening, I wrote back. I told her I had received the message and I appreciated that she had sent it. I told her I was not in a place to act as if none of it had happened. I told her I was open to talking at some point, but that I needed more time before I was ready for that. I sent it and put my phone face down on the desk and went back to a project file I had open. I did not forward that message to Marcus or Lily. I did not call my mother to tell her about it. I did not post about it anywhere. I sat with it privately and then I moved on with my week. 2 months earlier, Garrett and I had dinner together at a place he likes near his office. It was not a debrief. It was not a formal occasion. He asked about my work and I told him about the contracts. He talked about a property deal he was finalizing. We split the check because he insisted on paying half and I insisted on paying the other half, and we both found that funny. He said one thing before we left. He said he should have spoken up sooner at previous gatherings, and he did not. He said he was not asking me to give him credit for what he did at the dinner. He just wanted to say that he saw what had been happening and he wished he had moved faster. I told him I was glad he moved when he did. That was enough. As for my mother, things between us are still complicated. She calls more often now than she did before the trip. Some of those calls are good. Some of them slip back into old patterns and I have to redirect the conversation or cut it short. I am not carrying bitterness toward her, but I am also not pretending the lobby never happened. She stood there and said nothing while her daughter was publicly called a failure. That is something I know about her now that I cannot unknow. What I do with that knowledge is something I am still figuring out. Here is what I know clearly, and what I want to leave you with. I did not win anything in that lobby. I walked out because staying and absorbing that in silence was going to cost me something I was not willing to pay. The word failure has a specific expiration date when you are the one actually doing the work. Nobody can hand you your own sense of worth, and nobody can take it either. It lives or dies based on what you do on the ordinary days, the slow months, the mornings when the inbox is empty and the doubt is loud. The hardest part of that whole experience was not the lobby. It was the drive to the resort, when I still believed the trip was going to be normal. When I still thought my mother had invited me because she wanted me there. That version of the story hurt more than anything Dara said, because I had written it myself. I am still in the process of building something. I am not done. But I am steadier than I was, and I built that steadiness myself, one client at a time, one decision at a time. The people who doubted me out loud did not slow me down. The person who believed in me quietly, who drove the last 2 hours of a road trip asking real questions and actually listening, helped me more than he probably knows. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel like you did not belong somewhere by the people who were supposed to be in your corner? What did you do? Drop your answer in the comments because I read every single one, and I know there are people watching this who need to hear that they are not the only one. If this story stayed with you, please hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it helps more than you know. Subscribe so you are here for the next story, and if you know someone who is going through something like this right now, share this with them. Sometimes the most useful thing is just knowing someone else has been in that lobby too. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself this week. You are doing better than you think.